We welcome back once again the Massachusetts State Senate Minority Leader Bruce Tarr, who checks in with us from time to time, or we check in with him is more apropos. Senator, welcome. How are you?
I'm doing great, Rick. How are you?
Very well, very well.
Good, good.
Not the greatest weather this summer, but I know that you've been up in Gloucester. They have in Gloucester, the Gloucester 400 is continuing. And I haven't seen a lot of splash about the celebration of 400, but there have been some events. And I understand you were at one this weekend.
Well, I actually was at two, Rick. We talked about one off air, which was the Fisheries Heritage Celebration, which happened at the Jodrey State Fish Pier, which was 2 days of celebrating all of the things that the fisheries mean to us in Gloucester, on Cape Ann, and Massachusetts. And Rick, it was a very well attended event. The Saturday component of it had to do with sort of the nuts and bolts of the industry. There were demonstrations of safety equipment. There were discussions about benefits for the people that are in the fishing industry in terms of health insurance and other kinds of things. And two of my favorite parts of it, Rick, were number one, there was a dory tipped up on its side. And in that dory was one of each of the species of groundfish that are landed in the port of Gloucester. And it was great to see them all in one place and have a couple of our captains that fish for those species talking about them to people who were visiting, and they were visiting, Rick, from all over the country. And my second favorite part of it were the fishing captains that have since retired telling stories about what it was like in older days of the fishery. Of course, the fishery still continues and is very vibrant, but it was great to hear about the days when maybe you didn't have as much technology and maybe your equipment wasn't as good and you had to rely a little bit more on what's inside rather than what's outside. And it was just a great event, Rick.
Yeah, and the stories I've certainly heard a lot of stories in my day from captains, and uh, some days you go look at the water and you say, "Man, I ain't going out there in this weather," and they'd be out there. So yeah, a great event. And you said you went to two. What was?
Well, so the second one was going on over a 4 day period, and that was the play, the Gloucester story, that was being presented, Rick, actually on Harriet Webster Pier at Maritime Gloucester. And it was put on by the Ennisquam Village Players. I've been performing with them for about 30 years, and they are a wonderful community resource, arguably the oldest summer stock theater company in the country. And what's interesting, Rick, is the Ennisquam Village Players at the time of the Civil War actually raised money to support those that were wounded and injured from the Civil War and for the cause at the time. But in this particular instance, the whole cast company, everything moved out to the pier and presented this play from the 50s, Rick, that was about a young 21-year-old man in Gloucester finding his way, wanting to go to sea, wanting to live the life of a fisherman, and some of the conflict that that presented in his life. And Rick, it was not all a lighthearted story. There's loss of a fishing vessel and loss of life in this story, but the Ennisquam Village Players did it so well. And I have to tell you, and I'll send you some pictures of this, Rick, that maybe you can post, but I took some pictures from up at the balcony in the harbor master's office, and the scene was surreal. The schooner Adventure was the backdrop for this play. People were seated out on the pier. The players were on a temporary stage, and it was just an incredible experience, not only to be part of it, and I helped to introduce the play on a couple of nights to the audience, but also to witness it. And Rick, this is a theater company that's like no other. It's all native folks that come. Sometimes if there isn't a part for someone, they make one up. But it's always an interesting exercise in inclusion, and it's a big family, and it was a wonderful experience. And it was done for the 400th anniversary to do the Gloucester story, to do it on the pier, and some very special nights, all except for one where the rain threatened. And so the whole thing got moved back to the Ennisquam Village Hall
Oh,
for
well,
that
yeah.
one night. And then the subsequent night moved back to Harriet Webster Pier. So, but it's just another great event for the Gloucester 400th.
One thing I wish people knew more about is the Tablet Rock at Stage Fort Park. When I was had professional development classes for teachers, I would take my class there and show them that tablet and the significance of Gloucester. I think it's lost on some people and how important this place was for the Mass Bay Colony.
It definitely is the case, Rick. It is important. And I always like to say the story of the Port of Gloucester is largely the story of America. people coming here looking for economic opportunity, working hard, taking risk, trying to build something better for the next generation than they had for themselves. All of that is in Gloucester's story. And as we grew, so the nation grew. And I think, you and I have talked about this many times, that it is a story that everyone should be familiar with. And to think about what happened at Stage Fort Park, where the name derives from fishing stages that were put out into the harbor. And in those days, you could execute a bountiful fishery right from the harbor. To think about how special that one place alone is really amazing.
Yeah. All right, let's get down to earth here a little bit. In a more somber note, I saw on tartalk.com that North Andover took quite a beating with this most recent downpours, and you were up there.
It did, Rick. It was an incredible event, but not incredible in a positive sense, where you had about 4 hours total of 8 inches of rain. And so it was a massive weather event, and it overwhelmed the ability of all of the systems that are designed to accommodate that kind of rain, that kind of storm flow. And Rick, there is a lot of damage in North Andover. I was visiting the site of the mills down on High Street, Water Street, High Street, with Congressman Moulton. And then subsequent to that visit was visiting a lot of the locations that were affected with the police chief and the fire chief. And after that, I made a call to Governor Healy and I said, we really need to have you come look at this. She responded immediately with Lieutenant Governor Driscoll the following day. So we've been spending a lot of time looking at the damage. And Rick, a lot of the damage in the media has been with that set of mill buildings on High Street, which is a bit of a low point in a bowl in North Andover. But the subsequent day to Congressman Moulton's visit, we pulled everybody together at North Andover Town Hall, thanks to North Andover Town Administrator Melissa Rodericks. And it was amazing to hear about the damage in other communities as well, whether that be Lawrence, Haverhill, Andover, Methuen. So this was a very impactful event. And not only have we been there looking at things, but also putting together a game plan with the Mass Emergency Management Agency to help people recover. But Rick, the one thing that shone through in each of those visits with the congressman, the governor, the lieutenant governor, we're working on bringing the Senate president and our Senate Chair Ways and Means to the site this week. The one thing that stood out above everything else, as impactful as the devastation was the spirit and the attitude of the people that have been impacted by these events. To a person, they said, we are going to be here, we're going to work through this, we're going to rebuild. And that was something that I think is uplifting for all of us that have been involved with the situation.
That's encouraging. The other thing is, with the recent rains, I'm noticing, maybe it's just because I'm just noticing it, but the sewage overflow that happens, and I know in the Merrimack Valley has problems with the river from towns upriver. And then more recently, it was the beaches along Swampscott and Lynn. Is that something that gets into the State House? Is this something that is beginning to weigh on people?
Very much so, and I'm glad you asked. So when we have a major rain event, it has a number of impacts. One that we hear about a little bit more frequently than the others is the closure of our shellfish beds. Because when you have a rain event, there is storm runoff that goes into the water. And by the way, it comes from 2 sources. We hear a lot about the untreated effluent that's discharged by sewage treatment plants that can't handle the volume that comes from the rainwater, but it also comes from just runoff. And so between those 2 things, our shellfish beds get closed. Again, that's the thing we hear about more often. But what we've been hearing about a lot recently is our beaches get closed because the bacterial counts and other kinds of environmental factors do not make them suitable for public bathing. And that in turn has an economic impact because we don't want folks bathing in the water. So sometimes that's the reason they would come to Cape Ann or to Newburyport or to Salisbury. And this is a far-reaching issue. And Rick, I'm actually pleased to tell you, I know we're going to talk a little bit about the budget in this segment, but we have an effort that has been growing by the day with regard to the Merrimack River. And we have a coalition that is being administered by the Merrimack Valley Planning Commission that I'm very much a part of, my legislative colleagues are a part of, municipal officials are a part of, and we are trying to put together a game plan for the Merrimack River. Now, the one thing we've been able to accomplish so far is public notification, so that the treatment plants that are licensed to discharge into the Merrimack River, when they have an untreated discharge, they notify the communities, and we'll work on a system to notify the public. So awareness is one thing, but we have to work on solving the problem. And I was able to put $100,000 in the budget that was just signed by Governor Healy to fuel the work of that commission and that effort. The difficulty is, Rick, the treatment plants would need to be upgraded significantly to prevent this from happening. And not to go into this too deeply, but treatment plants are designed to handle what I'll call, for the purposes of this discussion, an average daily flow. If you build them larger than that, it doesn't become cost effective to pick up the outlier events when you have a big rainstorm. But the consequence of that is, when there is a big rainstorm, oftentimes untreated effluent gets discharged into our bodies of surface water, and that isn't good either. So what we're trying to do is work together to find ways to bring these plants to a point where they don't have all this untreated discharge, and to do it in a cost-effective way. And the biggest challenge of all that is finding the dollars to be able to do it. This is going to entail major infrastructure upgrades, and trying to find the way to fund that is a major challenge for us in state government and for the federal government. But to answer your question more directly, yes, it is at the State House. Yes, we do talk about it quite frequently, and we are going to work to continue to advance this effort.
Okay, that leads right into the budget. I'm guessing you're pretty pleased that the governor signed it so quickly.
Very much so. You know, we delivered the budget late. I think it should have been delivered earlier than it was, but it does take time to sort out all the things in a $56 billion spending document. It got to the governor scrutinized it. The governor vetoed about $276 million, $272 million, Rick, not because she disagreed with the items that money was going to be spent on, but because she disagreed with how we were going to fund that spending from a transitional escrow account, essentially a mini version of a rainy day fund that we had set up with some of the proceeds that we got from federal support, pandemic support. So she vetoed those items, but said that I believe we can fund them in a different way. So in the scheme of gubernatorial vetoes, $273 million in a $55.6 billion spending document is not a lot. But importantly, Rick, all of the earmarks that were made by legislators, for the most part, survived. There were very few vetoes of specific earmarks. And the reason that I'm happy about that is a number of those were earmarks that I had worked to put into the budget for things like stormwater management that we just discussed. For drought management, there's $150,000 to continue our efforts in Essex County around drought management, marsh restoration and killing the green crab and reducing its population. There's $200,000 that survived the governor's veto pen in the budget for that. And I won't list them all, Rick. We'll be posting them on social media. But the good news is a lot of very important local priorities survived the veto process. We have a budget. The budget is balanced. And that's good news for all of us.
So what's next for the Senate?
Well, we're going to return to formal sessions after Labor Day. And we've got a lot of issues to address. One that I'm going to be looking at is the issue of healthcare and cost containment. We've also got issues that are still fiscal in nature. And one of the most important priorities in that category, Rick, is tax relief. You know that we've been trying to get this for a significant period of time. You know that I have been pursuing this vigorously. The budget that was signed by the governor sets aside between $500 and $600 million to be able to execute a tax relief program in this fiscal year. And I am adamant that we need to get that done as one of the first things when we come back into session after Labor Day. And I think it's certainly doable. There is a conference committee meeting to discuss this right now. And hopefully that'll be something that you and I get to talk about very soon on MSO.
Okay. One final question. Well, how's the commute been with the Sumner Tunnel closed?
You know, it's interesting. Different times of the day deliver different results in terms of the traffic. We have a lot of congestion in the mornings, the times you would expect. around rush hour. But some days, Rick, I've been able to get in without too much difficulty at all. So it's hard to predict on any given day. I would say overall volume has increased, and hopefully the Sumner will be reopened very soon, and we won't have to worry about that contributing factor to rush hour traffic.